You never back favourites. Welcome to the show, Mum. Sean's in the studio, floating around somewhere. There, Sean?
Yeah, how you going?
You're doing a good job disappearing. Yes, today's show, bits and pieces. Seagulls and planes, something that comes up every now and again in the news. We thought we'd preempt the papers for a change and talk about seagull populations and that, and having a few sitting on the car the other day down the peninsula, sort of doing what they normally do on your windscreen, Mother, and flying around the place. Got me thinking about seagulls and why there were so many of the buggers. Fishing industry, there's actually been an unsolicited article called Angling for a Way to Save Our Oceans from Extinction by Julian Cribb in the Australian fishing industry. Something, if you've been a longer time listener to the Parrot, you would have heard us do lots of bits and pieces about. Also, Cape White butterflies. They're those lovely white butterflies that you'll see floating around at the moment through Melbourne. There's an article on those today by Ellen McCulloch, and they're white, all white, with a black rimming around and the actual veins and ribs are black, kind of whitey, pale yellow and paleo underneath. You'll see a few washed up on the bay at the moment too. They got blown out there in that last gale or westerly that we had, and they've washed up all over the place. And they're a northern migrant. They drift down from more northern climes and come down, and they actually sort of head straight out to Bass Strait. Perhaps in days gone by, there used to be vegetation in Bass Strait where they could fly continuously down there and breed along the way down to Tasmania. But of course, these days, big masses of them end up in their doom. So that's pretty interesting. And other bits and pieces, pesticides in food, more articles about farmers, greenhouse crap. And if you saw that's what's written on my list anyway, if you saw the debate on Sunday night, you'd realise what I mean. It appears to be that we have a whole lot of people coming out here telling us what's going on with the greenhouse effect, and a whole lot of people not really prepared to do much research, nor particularly bite any bullet about what's going on where. All we hear is, no reason for Australia to stop coal exports. Who said anything about coal exports? And in that line later on, we've got something coming up too. Roger Jones is on, and he'll be talking about a Melbourne Cup race of environmental issues. That'll sound pretty odd. Anyway, I got a little tip on that this afternoon. And also bits and pieces what's happening on in Gippsland. More from Fabian Douglas. A couple of weeks ago, we didn't have him last week, we played part of, and very well received part of, Fabian Douglas's work. He's a naturalist working on insects and in the big desert. And we've got a continuation of that tape from him. And perhaps, just perhaps, if I can sort out all the canoles in Geelong, Laurie Canole to talk about bats, and particularly the white striped bat, which is the bat that makes all the noise. And of course, Laurie's apologies this week. He's out doing what all naturalists should do. He's in the bush. Okay, fire up. Well, seagulls in tips. Lots of seagulls. Mum, you noticed an increase in seagulls over the years?
I'm over at Kingston Centre, and there's always a few over there. No, not really. No, never see any around our place.
Well, the breeding population on Mud Island, where they like to breed on islands, they breed in Dover Island too, out in Corner Inlet and other little places like that, where they can get away from things like predators, has got bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're forcing a lot of the other small wading birds and terns and stuff out, and more aggressive. Now,
I thought in the beginning the increase was due to all the tips around about.
You got it in one.
Attracts them.
The tips, no, it attracts them, it feeds them. Like if your population's set by your food availability, here's the Springvale tip, 1,500 acres of absolute delight swagman smorgasbord for seagulls out every day. And of course, there's no point in zapping their eggs or shooting them at Mud Island or whatever. You're going to have to cover the tips, and maybe with a bit of netting or something like that. And
if they're well fed, they'll keep on breeding.
But that brings up another thing about tips too. Great sources of methane, something else that doesn't get mentioned in all the debate about greenhouse gases. Methane from cows farting and belching is one particular source of it. Also from tips is the other. They do it, Mother. You have to be aware of these things.
Be nice.
All right. And is that better? And with methane, and with tips, a lot of organic waste is missed, and we all know from having a compost heap just how much fertiliser you can get and how much more fertile your veggie garden can become if you don't waste your waste. And perhaps it's long overdue that all local councils in Melbourne, particularly Melbourne City Council, which if you see those destructo bins they have in the middle of the city that have good timber in them quite often and a whole lot of paper waste and all the rest of it, and maybe if the council's provided waste paper recycling facilities, plastic recycling facilities and so on, we might do a lot towards saving on energy.
What happened to all the frantic fever of recycling everything a few years ago. Have they forgotten all about that?
It was lost
now?
in half a dozen grants, I think, though. A few people studied it and said something. And that was
Loads of
in it.
stuff they could recycle.
Well, it's not a matter of studying or anything. It's just a matter of people actually, councils, doing it. You know, it can easily be done. They just have to do it. You know, provide 3 bins, and if you don't separate your rubbish, they give you a bill. If you do separate the rubbish, they don't give you a bill.
They
No
only
better incentive than that.
concentrate on glass and paper. That's it.
Yeah, well, your organic waste. Like, well, if you're in a flat, you obviously can't have a giant compost heap. So all your organic waste and all that sort of stuff should, go into a pile, shouldn't it? Don't you reckon?
They used to save it. I remember years ago they used to save all the edible type of stuff from pig swill.
Yeah, that finished, didn't it?
But they stopped that. But that could quite easily be
Compost. That's right. And if you're going to have methane too, you can do what the Northcote City Council did when the capping of their tip. The methane generates power, which plugs into the power grid. Now, the amount of methane that comes off the sewage plant at the Border Works, I'm sure, down at Carrum, and let alone Werribee, would be just absolutely humongous. And that could also be plugged into the power grid, which would save burning fossil fuels.
Talking about saving energy?
Well, it's all that's all we got out of that debate the other night, everyone raving on about ways of saving energy. And other things, pesticides and food. What is in the tucker you eat? Mum, you said once that we shouldn't eat too healthy a food because if we ate all organic food, the shock to our system would be too much.
We're not horses, we're human beings. I've always said that. People go mad on having everything raw, but I mean, if you go back to the Stone Age, that's probably how they ate it then, and they had digestive systems to cope with it, but it's like eating horse food.
No, I'm not talking about lentils and stuff like that.
No, I'm talking about unpolished rice and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, that's okay, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I suppose if you can manage it.
I don't know, we'll continue this subject anyway.
Have I gone off the track?
No, not yet, but you're heading that way.
You want to talk about insecticides and I'm talking about digestion.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about your digestive system, I want to talk about insecticides. Oh, I don't know what I want to talk about. You've thrown me right up the track.
All right, I won't say any more.
No, you're right. Keep going. But no, with pesticides in food, it's become a major problem, and many farms, you might remember just recently, were condemned for high levels of dieldrin on their farm properties when it was found in the meat in export to America, which was found by the Americans trying to stop the import of Australian meat, by the way. And that's caused a major problem. Well, American people.
Who ended up eating it?
American
That's what I want to know.
Well, you did. You eat meat, don't you?
No, but, the stuff they rejected, what happened to that?
I think they throw it away, Mum. I don't think they send it back to Safeways. I think.
I was wondering.
No.
Feed it to the sharks and kill them off.
No. Look, you're an ecological disaster here tonight. You haven't got it together at all. This is rather amazing. Anyway.
I shouldn't have come.
No, you're right. Okay, now another note on the news that's come up. Mum, pick up your notes on the news. That way you can stay with me, all right? On the front page, you see that photo there? Right. This is Gina Whitler. Is that all? Did they cut off the rest of her name? Or is that all that's there? Upset at the condition of some of the springs, but full of praise to efforts to restore them. This is an all-woman expedition that was led in search of true desert. Ironically, after many, many years of biological pedanterising, nobody was really sure what parts of Australia qualified for desert and what parts didn't. An all-woman expedition set off, and unbelievably people said that they couldn't do it, and that just is absolute crap. Anyway, of course.
There's quite a large article in the Good Weekend
about
the expedition.
But the more interesting part, and this was one that came from Peter Ward in the Australian, was the state of the waterholes. And around the Artesian Basin there is a whole ring of freshwater springs, but one thing that a lot of people don't realise is that there are cattle grazed out there, and these are parts of large cattle grazing properties. The damage they do to the vegetation is unbelievable, and the desertification caused by cattle and sheep is also unbelievable, just incredible. And also the damage they do to the springs. She was full of praise for the springs that have been saved by the South Australian Parks and Wildlife Service, who'd fenced them, but are very, very critical of the areas that hadn't been fenced.
What happens to the natural wildlife around if they've got these springs fenced off? Because kangaroos and what have you would be drinking there, wouldn't they?
I'm not quite sure how they operate it with that. I think the main thing is they fence cattle out. I think kangaroos can get under a fence, obviously, that cattle can't. Like kangaroos can move through a farming property, all right, so there's no problem about that. Excluding kangaroos and excluding cattle and keeping kangaroos out Snowgrove.
Because that could be their watering hole. couldn't it?
Yeah, well, they get into it. But I think the thing is that the cattle get in, they bog it all up and they muddy it up and they destroy the stream side ecology. You lose all the plants, you lose the insects, you lose the invertebrates, you lose that whole ecosystem. And also they tend to fill in these water holes and many species rely on them. They're continuously disturbing them and so on. So bad news for cattle grazing. And I think this is going to come up again and again. And part of the greenhouse debate that is going to come up is the amount of carbon that's stored in organic matter such as plants and so on, and the deserts rate no mean mention themselves. Just having a fiddle with figures last week, say if your average 1,000-acre block of desert had 500 tonnes of vegetation in it, by the time you put cows through they'd lessened it to 100 tonnes of vegetation. You spread that across all the deserts, including all the root masses, the biomass of the animals and so on, then you can end up in big strife if you start knocking this vegetation around. And indeed, that's what we've done. And we can make great contributions towards solving the greenhouse effect and use it as yet another excuse, not that we should need one at all, but pulling vermin animals out of these areas. Surely it must be the most marginal of economics to graze cattle around the air basin. Just bloody crazy, you know, people pining for the fjords. All right, enough idiot talking from us for one day, almost. And we'll go into a track from... So I reckon you'll recognise this one. Don't even need
Cramps.
to announce it. No, you got it wrong. To the Parrots on 3RRR, and the time is around about almost exactly 23 minutes past the hour of 5 o'clock. And the Parrot does things besides talk to you on radio. One of the biggest hassles in, I suppose, in natural history education is to try to encourage people to get into the bush. Believe it or not, there's a lot of trouble getting a lot of people to move the city. All kinds of weird and wonderful excuses come up as to why they can't leave. Weddings, partings and anything is just like the band.
Work being
Work
nice.
and all these kind of things.
Important.
And they all stop people from going out and into the bush. If you want to get out into the bush with the Parrot, you can come out this weekend on a prom trip. And we do these trips to get you out there. We do them as cheapo as possible, which means that if we get a heap of people, we make a bit of money that goes back into the show. And on averages, we make just enough to cover our dues to get down there and to go out with you. If you want to go out on this trip, give us a ring now. And these trips to the prom are really important because, and that's 419-2066. These trips, if you got a brochure, we sent you one last week, give us a ring. Some people may have got them late due to a mail strike, a mail dispute. We just found out about that today, but we still need a few more bookings for this one on the weekend. Now, going out there is really important because it gives you a look at what Victoria used to be like. There's probably no better example of an intact, functioning ecosystem than Wilson's Promontory. And to go by boat in some ways is about the most passive way to go. Walking even along tracks, so you're crashing your way through on a man-made track through the bush or people-made track through the bush. If you're going along a road, obviously in a car, it's a fair old intrusion and it's pretty noisy. Even crashing bush bashing through the bush can be pretty noisy. But the boat cruising along on the water and at the whim of the waves in the sea is definitely the way to take it, and to take it so quietly. We don't get out into any rough water, we hug the coast so close you can see the barnacles sitting off the rocks. This time of the year, a few Cape Barren geese is still flying with their chicks that hatched a couple of months ago now. We've also got stacks of things like seals around, and the seals poke along the coast. Funny thing about the seals, when you see them out there, often on the Sunday morning when we take off from refuge, we stay at Refuge Cove down the east coast most times, and often on the Sunday morning you'll look out and you'll see these two flippers sitting up in the air, and that's how seals sleep. They lie over on their backs and they just put their flippers up. And you're just cruising along the boat and you think, what's that? And it's seals, a little pod of seals. And you get within about sort of 30 or 40 yards of them and they just flip over backwards and disappear under the water. The diving down there is absolutely and utterly mind-blowing. And snorkelling is something that I suppose anybody can do, absolutely anyone. I'll even get mother snorkelling. It is the easiest thing. Face mask and snorkel on, a pair of flippers. Don't even need flippers if you just want to go around close to the boat. Get in the water, get over the cold in 2 seconds. And here's forest jungles of maybe 100 or 200 species of seaweed around you, corals, Ascidian sea squirts in reds and yellows and oranges, and just literally thousands and thousands of fish species. So if you've had the day off today and you're quietly cruising thinking, gee, I wish I got out of the town, well, maybe next weekend's your weekend, and you can give us a ring now, 419-2066. Sean will take your call if you want to come out on a prom trip. Bloody important that you go, because it keeps the Parrot functioning and it allows you to take in the bush. And also too, if you get out into the bush with people, you get to find out what you're actually interested in, and there's nothing better. And the number of plants, birds and animals you run into on a prom trip is absolutely amazing. And every trip's different. So even if you've been out before, think again. Come out again with us. It'll be good to see you. 419-2066 is that number. Okay, other bits and pieces that are coming up in the show. And things are minke whales. There's a minke whale, which is a small whale, going up a river in Queensland, up into the Lakes District National Park, which is pretty interesting. A heap of national parks people have been up there having a look at it, and it stayed in the river some few days. It's left just a couple of days ago. It didn't appear under any stress, and most of the reason given for the whale going up there was just basic curiosity. So good to hear that things are still being curious.
About the same size as a porpoise, would there be that
No,
small?
a bit bigger, like say 25 feet, something like that. The minks are the ones that the Japanese are killing at the moment for experimental purposes.
Oh, yeah.
Don't believe them, Mum.
Too many. They're taking too many.
They shouldn't be taking any. I think it's probably one thing we can do without. Also, other things floating along in the news, apart from Caper whites, minke whales, an article on Mary Wade. Mary Wade, you might remember we interviewed last week, and unfortunately had a drop line and missed part of the interview with her. But there's an excellent article in The Age and about Mary Wade and with her pick and shovel to the dinosaur fields. And Mary's getting on. She's like you, Mum. She's getting towards retiring age, dear. And
She won't retire.
she said that when she retires from the museum, she'll work as a volunteer. And something handy to remember, because you can work as a volunteer at the Victorian Museum, as they now call it, the Victorian Natural History Museum in Swanston Street. If you go in there and ask at the office and sort of pick who you want to help with. I think paleontology takes volunteers. They have volunteers on digs, and various other departments always need a hand sorting and
You'd have to have a
shuffling.
bit of background knowledge, though.
No, they'll help you through. No. There's lots of people do it. It's really good and really helps the museum. It's a great way to learn. I worked as a volunteer as a kid in the museum. Learnt stacks just sorting through collections and cleaning things and that. It's great. And
Well,
that's
when I
something we must do again.
retire, when I retire,
When you retire.
I'll give my services, part of my time, to the museum.
To the museum. I thought you were going to donate your body, love.
I might even do that as well.
And yes, other bits and pieces. Okay, we've got Roger coming up very shortly, but before we get into Roger, we'll have to have a track first, a little bit more about the greenhouse. This debate is going to keep going. There's a big conference happening at Dallas Brooks Hall on this Thursday night. If you want to go, I think you can still get to go if you ring the Commission for the Future in Carlton. And I think that's the best bet, and that's Thursday night this week. And we've got an interview with Dr. Stephen Stein, who will be the opening speaker at that meeting. But this greenhouse thing is a strange one. On one hand, it appears the majority of scientists take it for granted that we are going through a period of warming. And as you might have heard Tim Flannery say last week, that that warming is going to have pretty catastrophic effects upon a lot of mammals, particularly that live in the tops of mountain peaks and so on throughout Melanesia, and at least one Australian mammal, Burramus, the mountain pygmy possum, only recently discovered itself. But we also hear a lot about tide, and if you heard the interview with Dr. Graham Pearman, you'd realise that the sea level rise won't just happen in one 12-centimetre lift. It'll be a series of tides. So perhaps in the interview with Stephen Stein we're repeating that background, but listen carefully to it, because just after we talk to Roger, we bring that up again, I can't help but feel that there's a kind of broad paintbrush of don't panic being painted everywhere on the basis of perhaps little scientific information. There's no doubt that much of the world's problems could be got around by storing of carbon. When people say that we'd have to increase the world's forests by 100% to store the carbon, surely the first step, the excess carbon that we use,
Stop chopping them down.
is to stop chopping the forest down. That makes the Tasmanian wood chip scheme on a daily basis look more and more incredibly stupid. There's nothing wrong with logging if you take out selective trees of timber. In fact, it's almost compatible with national parks values if you just take out ideal timber trees with no interference whatsoever. But there certainly is a hell of a lot wrong with clear felling, and there's no better example perhaps than the effect on the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere. And particularly when you get the double jeopardy of a lot of areas of tropical forests that are cleared, and then cows are put on them and they start belching and doing the other thing that Mum doesn't like me saying on radio. What's that again, Mum? Farting. And did it again. And that doubles the effect, with methane being a far more efficient insulator than carbon dioxide. Okay, things to think about? Well, one person who's been doing some thinking, I'm sure, in Gippsland is Roger Jones. We're just going to go into a brief track. We're going to come back and talk to Roger. A little bit more music for this cup day, this cruisy day, from Carmel. This one's I'm Not Afraid of You. Not afraid of you, Mum. Out from 23 minutes towards the hour of 6 o'clock. And this is the Eclectic Parrot. And our regular guest on the Eclectic Parrot is Roger Jones. You there, Roger? Yes?
Yep.
Yep, beauty. Roger, South Gippsland, we didn't have much of a chance to talk last week, but I suppose just to recap, it was a bit of a surprise to everyone that there was salinity problems in South Gippsland.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned last week, 16,000 hectares have now been mapped. Just to recap on some of those areas, the major problem is around Lake Wellington, which they've had some problems there since the 50s. There's the McAllister irrigation area just to the northwest of there. They have some problems, also some since the 50s, but getting slightly worse. There are various pockets all the way through. There are a few just south of Druin. There's actually one fairly significant area just north of Yarram, which might be a bit surprising, and two less surprising areas on French Island and Phillip Island.
Right, now, why do you say less surprising on French and Phillip? Because they've been cleared so much?
One is that they've got basalt on them, and basalt actually holds sodium. That's down because basalt breaks down chemically. That often leaves some salt behind. The other thing is that they're both very close to the sea, so they actually collect wind-blown salt as well. So you combine the two effects of reasonably poor drainage, which you also get on basalt soils. They're sort of sopping in the winter and bone dry in the summer, and you don't have very well-developed streams on them. That sort of combines to give a bit of a salinity problem on Phillip Island, also because the island's been extensively cleared, so you alter the balance of groundwater, and it's going to have some sort of effect, and salinity is the effect that we see.
Right, well, look, I was down the peninsula the other day and somebody asked what the effect of clearing was, and I was starting to sort of think about it, I suppose after talking to you so long. And it's interesting, isn't it, that fresh water will float on top of salt water and sort of add a bit of pressure to keep the saline water down.
Well, it will do that in an open water body. It doesn't so much happen underground, but it certainly happens in the lakes, for instance, and it happens in the sea, that you can actually see that. If you've got a river, that it will float out in a tongue over the ocean, and this water can actually go quite a long way before it mixes. Well, the interesting thing, salt into fresh water. Actually, I went down the Gippsland Lakes a couple of weeks ago and did little taste tests all the way along. So I started at Sale at the Thompson River. You taste that water, it's very muddy. I'm excuse me, surprised how turbid the river is, how turbid these rivers have become, mainly due to increased farmland. There's a lot more dirt eroding into them. They're quite brown.
And logging too, mate.
And logging. And so that water wasn't salty at all. You go into the west side of Lake Wellington, which is the first of the Gippsland lakes. The water's quite fresh. It's down around about a gram per litre, which is just where you can taste it. You go to the other side there, and you're up around 3,000 parts tasted about. I didn't have the salt meter with me, which was stupid. It's just tasting this. Then we've got a channel that goes from there into Lake Victoria, and that channel, you start to get the tidal effects in there. So the salt gets up a bit. By the time you get into the first bit of Lake Victoria, it's up around 7,000 parts, which is 7 grams of salt for every litre of water. And I went into the Gippsland Lakes National Park right up to Sperm Whale Head, which they call, because it's a sperm whale, looks like a sperm whale, not because any whales actually go into Lake Victoria. And in there it's up around 20 grams, about 60% of the salinity of seawater, and it's actually more a marine habitat by the time you've got into that stage. So the lakes get fairly salty fairly fast, and I suppose I can mention the controversy if people haven't heard of it, but it's been going on for years. The entrance at Lakes Entrance was opened up in the 1890s, and so that started a fight that people have been blaming increased salinity on the lakes on various things, and one of them is the opening of the entrance. Now, before that, it wasn't closed all the time. It was more or less an entrance that opened and closed, depended on the prevailing wind, on tides, on storms, things like that. So sometimes it was open, sometimes it was closed. And the lakes basically set their own balance. Since then, there's been a number of factors operating. One is that the climate's been getting drier over the last 100 years. So there's less runoff going into the lakes, but slowly. So they've probably been, over time, getting slightly saltier. Then we open the entrance, and that means that the tidal effects can go further into the lakes, which is what's happened. And then the third input into them, which people really haven't woken up to in the last couple of years, is that the water table underneath Lake Wellington or around Lake Wellington has risen so much that in some parts, if you actually put a borehole down through the clay, which stops the water from coming up, but put it down through the clay into the sands, which are only a few metres down, 10 metres at the most before you hit them, the water can actually bubble up to the surface. So some of this salty water is coming up through the bed of the lake into the lake. And in summer, when fresh water flows from the rivers are very low, and this addition of salt becomes quite significant. So there's actually a fair variation in the salinity of the lakes, that in the winter they become quite a bit fresher, in the summer they become quite a bit saltier. And then we start adding things to this, like the fact that some of the vegetation around the lake shore is dying because it's not used to the amount of salt. It's been a fairly fast change, so it hasn't had time to adjust. The loss of species in the lakes through general lots of different reasons.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, in that reason line, you'd have to put in the massive input over the years from the Dutson Down Sewage Farm and the combined industrial waste from the Latrobe Valley too, wouldn't you?
Right, we've got a lot of, in the past particularly, a lot of untreated stuff going down the rivers. There's definitely Dutson Downs, which flows into Lake Coleman, which flows into Wellington. It's an overflow situation. Lake Coleman is, well, it's I suppose Australia's version of the Great Lakes. It's very depleted indeed. Sometimes the water is so black that if you put it in a milk bottle you can't shine a torch through it. I don't think it's quite that bad now, but it has been.
D for dead, isn't it? Isn't it the sort of original studies that they tried to do up there, I know, 5 years ago? They were really pushing to find anything alive for a biological study at all in the water.
Well, and all this is combined to mean that when you get the nutrient input in the lakes that comes in off farmland, we've got less species to deal with that nutrient, we've got reduced conditions for all these things to grow, and we start seeing algal blooms. And they really have become a factor down here in the last few years. It affects the tourist industry. It affects the oxygen content in the water, which is very important for fish and for other filter feeders who need an amount of oxygen, because what happens is the algae blooms, it gets up to that stage. You can do your experiment yourself in a Petri dish. All you need is one dish. You find it just goes for it, and then of course everything dies off because there are no more nutrients left. And that's been...
And no oxygen, isn't that the major point?
Oxygen is the major problem, and so there's plenty of life, but not the diversity you want. There's the mass of it. So there's all these problems that are interconnected with the Gippsland lakes, and I don't have access to the hard scientific information, but from talking to people and from seeing things and from reading things in the past and going to lectures, sort of a combination of these different factors are working. So that's one problem. So you can see that if we talk about salinity, we're talking about quality of the water of the lakes and of the biota of just about everything. It's very hard. People like down here that they look at an issue and you're looking for what's to blame, and you're really looking at a combination of a whole heap of things.
Sounds like a familiar story these days with lots of things, Roger, like with the greenhouse debate I was saying on air before you came on, that it's a complicated story, but people seem to be sort of trying to simplify it too much to come out with these sort of pat stories, buy a smaller car, do this, do that, do the other, without really considering the whole breadth of the problem and looking at practical things we can do in changing ways, like not knocking over vegetation or any more, and getting into revegetation to store carbon, things like that that are achievable without massive changes of lifestyle.
Yeah, I think so. People seem to think that their brains are going to hurt if the story gets too complicated, but the human mind is a wonderful thing, and if it can grasp the totality of what's going on in the bush, which is truly a wonderful thing, certainly some of these problems that people could understand them a bit more than they do. Another one of the factors, I suppose, that's affecting the area of Gippsland particularly much is that with salinity in the northern half of the state, we talk about the Murray Basin. down here, if you sort of treat it from the geology, you talk about the Gippsland Basin, and that's rather an interesting part of Australia. It first originated, I think, with the rifting between Australia and Antarctica, and also probably partly the rifting between with New Zealand off the other side. No one's quite sure where New Zealand came from, but for quite a few million years before Australia and Antarctica split, there was this rifting, there was massive volcanism, there were these big valleys formed. And what's happened in the Gippsland Basin is that offshore from Gippsland, the basin's been deepening, and it's been filling for well over about 130 million years more. I can't remember the exact numbers. But so in that time, we've had the coal fields of the Latrobe Valley formed. We've had some black coal formed in older rocks down near Wonthaggi. We've had the oil fields formed further out off the coast, and that basin is still forming today. And one of the major factors in its recent formation has been the upthrusting of the Central Highlands. So there weren't always mountains in the Great Divide there. In times past it's been quite low. It was low for a very long time. But in the past few million years, 5 to 15, they've been uplifted to a degree. And also the sea has moved in from the coast where it is now. It's been 10 metres higher than it has been. It's been 100 metres lower, which has changed the characters of the rivers a lot. They've been eroding massively, and so there are these quite thick gravel beds that form most of the topography and geology around the place, and they're unconcreted. They hold from between about 5% up to about 25% pore space, which means that can all fill up with water. So they're holding a lot of water, like a giant sponge, if you like, covered over with clay soils at the top for the most part. In some areas, if you come down here, you can see them in road cuttings, and you see these unsorted gravels up the tops and sometimes all down the sides of road cuttings. And the ones right at the very top are called the haunted hill gravels. They go all the way through Gippsland. And what happens is that they recharge with water very fast. So if we go clearing up near the hills, they can recharge with water fairly fast, and then you find that increases water pressure. It's like pumping water up into a water tower. But further down the line, further down towards the coast, water pressure is increased there. The water tends to push up. It will fill up all the available spaces, and then say, if it's covered by clay, it'll just undergo more and more pressure. And that's what's happening down at Lake Wellington. It's sort of the end of the line. And so that's forming a regional problem around there. Also at various other places, there are small localised patches of salting caused by clearing in individual catchments and individual basins. And they're probably the result for a lot of these smaller little patches that have turned up around the place. And they extend virtually all the way from Melbourne up to, there are a couple at Orbost.
Right. Well, salinity, a problem even in Gippsland, and I suppose it's being tackled, but at least for listeners we're getting some kind of feedback on it. Roger, it's a race day today, and I think you had a call of your own.
Yes, well, what happened was we turned on the radio down here and thought we were going to get the Melbourne Cup, but we got this other strange call. So, I decided to tape it, and this is what it came up with. Just listen to what strange things that happen with the radio waves down here.
And we're preparing for the start of the fastest Bicentennial Cup, approaching the barrier. First fleet is in. Convict a bit reluctant, but goes in. Government today is wearing blinkers, and 200-year itch has been scratched. All runners are up now, ready. And racing, hypocrisy off to a good start, and exploitation is coming out well. Settlement's a bit slow early on. Genocide started in near the rails, but has gone out wide and is completely off the rails. Rum Rebellion was broken quickly, and Squatter's given a good start. Botany Bay was the early leader, but is disappearing as New South Wales takes the lead, closely followed by Demons Land and Western Australia. Oh, Aborigines, the early race favourite, has been cut off by Genocide, who is now out with the leaders. Down to the 150, and Victoria's coming into the race with Queensland and South Australia. And here comes Gold Rush out of nowhere, digging up the track as it goes, making it extremely difficult for Habitat and Heritage, which is falling behind. Squatter follows closely, and deforestation is starting to make an impact. Genocide continues on strongly, almost finishing one race just after the other started. Aborigines protest, but government is still running with blinkers, followed by Rabbit Plague and Big Business getting a run on despite trade unionism skipping at its heels. Down to the 100 and Gold Rush is slowing while deforestation is beginning to gain ground. Convict is out of the race and Squatter is moving into the centre with Drover's Dog and Overgrazing follows closely behind. Species Lost is starting to make an impact along with drought, rabbit plague and weed infestation in hot pursuit. New South Wales, followed by Victoria, Queensland, South and Western Australia and Van Diemen's Land have dropped right back. Federation has overtaken them after running unsighted for most of the race. And government has fallen. No, I'm sorry. Only the rider has fallen. Government is racing riderless, which has happened in nearly every race this season. Exploitation and big business are making their runs now, followed by the Great War and the Flowers of Youth has fallen in the trenches, taking innocence as well. The rest of the runners are making hard going of it during the Depression, except for Rabbit Plague and Drought, who are coming on well. Down the 50 and a number of entries are out of the race, but Great War is making a second run to the front with Exploitation and Big Business, the riderless government running close behind. Genocide is following a bit more closely now. Deforestation, overgrazing and species lost are doing well, followed closely by the rabbit plague, weed infestation, and cane toad has come into the running. Prickly pear is all over the place, overgrazing close behind, and soil erosion is coming up through the field. Also coming up is water table, closely followed by irrigation, and salinity is beginning to make its appearance. Deforestation and wood chipping are making a mess of the rail. On the run home, and it's still exploitation and big business, closely followed by soil erosion, salinity and uranium mining, with species lost, weed infestation and rabbit plague going ahead strongly with cane toad just a hop behind them and government following behind, but still riderless. Aborigines are now in front of genocide, which is still in the race but falling back. First Fleet has returned to the start for a reenactment. Near the finish, and it's still exploitation and big business with the others in a big bunch across the track. Greenhouse effect and ozone layer, 2 late entries along with the others. The last few metres and it's neck and neck. Your neck, my neck, everybody's neck. And they're home. Too close to call. I'd hate to say which one won. Judges have called for a photo. Judges call for a photo as they all cross the line together in this, the fastest bicentennial cup. Big business and exploitation were there most of the way. Soil erosion, salinity, species lost, deforestation and a late show by ozone layer and greenhouse effect all have a chance. Oh, I'd hate to call it, so we're waiting on a photo. There's been a protest. Ecology has protested, but no one noticed and the protest has been dismissed. Protest dismissed. Judges call for a photo. We can't tell you who won, but there are a number of likely losers, including the Australian people. It will take some time for the result to develop, perhaps another 200 years. So while we're all sitting around and waiting, we might as well go back to the studio.
And back in the studio indeed. And Roger, a better cup than the one we heard today.
Oh, well, I thought so.
All right, mate. Thanks a lot. And we'll check you next week with some more update.
See you later.
Okay, mate. And yes, another Melbourne Cup. Perhaps that's the one that races every week unbeknownst. Okay, into a track and back with more. Yes, my aim is true. Alison, Elvis Costello. And you're on the Eclectic Parrot 3 RRR. It's just almost on 6 o'clock. We're just about to go into an interview with an overseas expert. Well, they always seem to be from America. And it's Dr. Stephen Steiner, and he's from the National Centre for Atmospheric Research, Boulder, Colorado. And to be fair, the Americans have put a fair bit of more work into CO2 than what we have. And so if anyone would know about it, perhaps him. But before we do that interview, what are you doing sitting upon fat, spotty derriere, stuck in smog-breathing Melbourne, feeling like maybe you should go bush? How many friends have you told about your in-depth wilderness feelings with forgetting what they are yourself? When was the last time you dipped your head in the wild briny? Why do you persist in sucking cappuccinos and beer and hanging out for the wanton weed knowing that it's a drought? Yes, it's your turn, your chance to go to Bass Strait. If you have a brochure in your hand, ring up and say, I cannot wait. Next week I will do it. Next week I am going down. In fact, this Friday night I am taking my body and I am driving down. I will camp overnight at the South Gippsland Museum. I will get up in the morning. I will hop on a boat. I will forget all my troubles and cares and I will laze in the sunshine as I drift down one of the best wilderness coasts in Victoria and camp to the sound of frogs and koalas and things like that instead of city and smog. Yes, I will cancel that dinner party. Yes, I will cancel that engagement. And yes, I will go. yes, I think $80 is about the fairest price I've ever heard, and after all, it's just for the parrot. If you feel like that, give us a ring, 419-2066, fire up. We're out here to take your calls, and the parrot's here to get you into the bush and to save the bush so we can get you out into it. Two things, eh? Okay, so while you're all firing up on your Cup Day slow slumberies and giving us a call, we'll listen to this interview about the kinds of things that we'll be talking about in the future with Dr. Stephen Steiner. Stephen, with global warming, and everyone's talking about the greenhouse effect, it's not just carbon dioxide, it's a whole lot of chemicals released into the atmosphere by various activities. What is the mix, and what kinds of chemicals go into that mix?
Yeah, it's true, Bob, that CO2 is one of them. It's the principal one in the sense that it's responsible for about half the effect that we believe is happening now, and certainly we expect to happen in the future. Other kinds of chemicals, methane, which is produced in cows. They do an awful lot out of every end.
Yeah, it's blowing out of both ends.
Now, both ends. And rice paddies also produce a lot of methane, nitrous oxides, fluorocarbons, and a lot of other little nitrogen and sulfur oxides.
And this whole lot adds up to around about half.
Yeah, you have enough nickels and dimes, and pretty soon you have half a dollar, and that's just about what it is.
Well, you mentioned methane. That's an interesting thing because ecologically cows are now covering most of the landmass of the earth, bar deserts and things like alpine areas and stuff like that are just too far out of their climatic zone. Is methane a big contributor in that line?
About 10% is my memory of it. It's maybe
up and down
on that order. We know that it isn't just speculation that methane will change, because if you take a look backwards at the history of the Earth's atmosphere, and you might ask me, how do you know? Well, the answer to that is you go to the ice caps.
And bubble of gas in the ice.
Bubbles of gas trapped, and we know that methane and CO2 both have increased substantially since the Industrial Revolution. And methane, I think, has doubled. CO2 is up about 25%. And the other interesting thing is if you go back to 20,000 years ago when the Earth was 5 degrees Celsius colder than it is now, the Ice Age, CO2 was 30% less and methane was also less. Then you go back 120,000 years, way back to our caveman ancestors that literally analyzed the air they were breathing. And you find out that in the warm time back then, that methane and CO2 were close to today's level, and in the cold times, there was less of it. So there's a very close association between those greenhouse gases and temperature, and it's the association is the way we'd expect, and it's extra evidence that gives us some confidence to be a little worried.
Right, now, a lot of people are under the misconception that somehow that the sea level has been remarkably constant for many, many years, and that now we're talking about the freak out of sea level rise, but stranded coastlines around Victorian coastline show of a sea level that was significantly higher and not too many years ago, and also a sea level significantly lower. It's a bit hard to see coastline under the water, but at the time when the Yarra River here that runs through Melbourne was a tributary of the Tamar that comes from Tasmania, and Aboriginal people occupied what is now Bass Strait. Now, sea level rises and changes, everyone seems to be very hesitant about saying a metre sea level rise. There's been greater sea level rises in the past 100,000 years than that, hasn't there?
Oh, sure. The end of the Ice Age, say, let's 15,000 years ago, and it was on the way out. Sea level was 100 meters or so lower than it was now. You're right. You could have walked from New Guinea to Australia. And in a time frame of about 5,000 years, the Earth warmed up something like 5 degrees C. Sea levels came up something like 100, 120 meters. But if you look at those rates, you see that that's about 1-2 degrees C in 1,000 years. And that is a rate that's about 1/10 as fast as what we are probably doing to the planet with our greenhouse gases. In fact, it may even be as small as 100th the rate. So we're 10 to 100 times faster, and that is dramatically fast. However, that's in temperature. In terms of sea level, we'd be hard-pressed to go much faster than the rate at which the great glaciers were disintegrating. We might be able to get 1 or 2 meters out of it in the next 100 years, but no one I know of thinks there's much chance of getting sea level to rise faster than that on the time frame of 100 years, but we may very well be sowing the seeds of committing the Earth to, say, a 5 or a 10-meter sea level rise in 500 years. Even though we won't feel it right away, it may be too late to stop that from happening if we don't do something now.
Okay, let's just pick up the point of sea level rises. Sort of too often we hear about sea level rise. I think in the interview you did with Leif Young, Australia was looking at 12 to 15 centimetres. But the sea is a fickle place, and depending on tides, currents and winds, rises in sea level can manifest themselves in strange ways. When we interviewed Dr. Graham Pearman, for instance, he said a changing of a major current on the east coast of Australia, for instance, could lead to a sea level fall. The same way that your hose pushes the water up higher in the bathtub, if you remove that continuous pressure of a current from a particular coastline, the tides mightn't rise as high. By the same effect, if you add even 10 centimetres to our overall water budget, if you like, we could get that multiplied many times with high tides. On high tides affected by moon and sun, a big spring tide, a king tide, can really exaggerate that. Is there much research to look at those exaggeration factors?
Well, we know that those exaggeration factors occur all around the world now. Well, the research that you want us to do, Bob, is to try to predict exactly what's going to happen regionally, and it's very difficult to say. Oh, I can say one thing, though, to give some perspective on this. The major damage that we get from sea level rise is not getting our toes wet, from a permanent rise of 10 or 20 or even 50 centimeters. What it really gets you is when you get a major storm, right? A tropical cyclone comes by, say up in the north or in the...
Or a big southwest mollybuster down here.
Okay,
right.
And you get a sea level rise of 5 to 10 meters associated with that. Now, if that happens to come by chance at a high sun-moon tide at the same time, and you add another meter of sea level, then the distance inland to that very rapid and dangerous inundation wave comes. This can rise in a matter of an hour. Well, very far. That's what I'm afraid of, is that the probability of, say, the 100 years flood now becomes the 50 years flood, and the 50 or the 25. And that has tremendous economic implications for land use near coastlines. Well,
just to give one, I suppose, to bring down to practical reality, we have a Border Works major sewage plant for Melbourne, which has been said to be one of the most advanced plants in the world. It covers several hundred hectares. It's only half a metre above sea level. And that puts it in a pretty dubious position should there be a sea level rise.
Right now, with or without the greenhouse effect, all the greenhouse effect is going to do is make the probability of it getting wiped out or washed out at least just that much higher.
So we could see a very big chain reactive effect, and this is going to apply to sewage farms in Western countries right across the world, I suppose, because a lot of them are put right on marshlands and that very close to sea level.
Yes, and that's not as serious, however, as nuclear power plants right there on the coastlines.
Right, we've got nuclear power plants within a metre of sea level too.
Well, that one has me more worried.
Right. Me too, I hadn't thought of that one. Okay, now, one of the things that's come up, and I know it's been mentioned, but a lot of biologists in Melbourne and botanists are getting together at the moment, and we feel that it had scant mention, is the multiplier effect of chopping down trees, of clearing land. Often when we refer to clearing of land, we refer to the third world, and the finger points very naughtily at Brazil and Borneo and places like this, and we say that we can't tell them to stop chopping down their forests because they need the money and so on. In Australia currently, the world's largest pulp mill, southern hemisphere I should say, the largest pulp mill is being built in Tasmania, and it's going to produce 1.6 million tonnes it'll process of wood chips per year. Now, that 1.6 million tonnes of wood chips is going to come from some 6 million tonnes of timber. And in other words, that's the waste factor of taking chips. You can't get the branches and you can't get the roots. And then when we go through our multiplier effect to see what kind of effect that's going to have, the 6 million tonnes of timber now becomes 18 million tonnes. And working from Dr. Graham Pearman's figures, that we have this multiplier effect from the peat and the leaf litter and so on stored in the soil. Are these multipliers taken into account? Do you think there's a lot more research needed in forestry to find out just what effect? Because, of course, 18